good morning, good afternoon actually. And thank you for coming to what is to date the highlight of my professional career. So appreciate you coming along. Originally this talk was going to be about enfolding design into our automation process. It's something that you've already started to hear and you'll hear a lot more of. And then Chris and Scott suggested I do the keynote, and after I tried to talk them out of it for a while, and they assured me that they were confident that this was the right direction. And trust me, I have a healthy ego, so it wasn't anything about that. In fact, at AutoCon 2, I remember I was in the vendor space and Eric Cho was walking towards me. And I'm like, oh my God, Eric's coming towards me. He's going to introduce himself. This is fantastic. And he came up to me and he gave me his phone and asked if I could take a picture of him and Dinesh Dutt. So, and still my ego is pretty healthy. Chris and Scott assured me this was the way to go, and I said, oh goody. And I took the presentation that I started out with and really sort of expanded it to several layers of beginnings. So in the beginning, networking was a bottleneck. We heard that all the time. At least I heard that all the time. And I am not going to argue, it was. And then we shifted into networking has been slow to embrace automation. Fair enough. And here we are, for me, 12 years later, and having the opportunity to look at all of these beginnings to do this keynote, I thought, okay, we made a pretty big jump there. Is there a relationship? And if there is, and I do believe that there is, I think we all do or we wouldn't be here, what is the relationship? Why is there a relationship? And I always like to do what ifs, right? You guys go on car trips, right? Road trips, and kind of one of the games we always play is what if? Well, I never heard the wireless was causing delays. I never heard the firewall was causing delays, except for maybe policy. And those are technologies, those are services that moved into controller-based kind of architectures. But that never really took off with the network. Clearly, there were options, there were ways to go down that road, but it didn't stick. And I'm not really sure why that is. Would love to hear from you guys personally here why you think that might be. But in that world, you have the ability to effect a lot of change on many devices very quickly with some rigor. But it didn't happen with the network. So here we are. Networking is a roadblock. Networking has been slow to embrace automation. Here we go. And so we were challenged, right? Do more with automation. And that's a pretty common theme in IT anyway, right? Do more with less. And again, I have to ask, okay, we're going to do automation. Why is that the right solution for networking? Okay, we haven't gotten the centralization part working very well. Maybe in the cloud, that was self-evident. I don't have a lot of experience there. I know many of you do. So maybe those conversations did happen in the cloud, and it was self-evident in the cloud. But for everyone else, we just kind of got mushed along. And I shouldn't say that, because I jumped in feet first. I always loved scripting. I started out in software development. And so for me, it was like, finally, basically automating my configurations is now fashionable. This is great, and I was having a ball. But it didn't stop to, like, I think maybe many of us, I didn't stop to think about kind of what we were doing. And then DevOps came along, and I wasn't quite sure what that was all about, but I knew NetDevOps was here, and I was all in, and yeah, that seemed like software development stuff. Does it apply to me? I never quite made that jump, that leap. And I don't think I'm alone. I think I'm up here because I'm sort of representative of a rank and file network engineer, right? I'm just your typical network engineer. And so I'm in this journey, and now I've been in this journey long enough where I can bring some perspectives to bear. So, I don't know if any of you follow Adam Ard. A few months ago, he wrote an article called, "In Retrospect, DevOps Was a Bad Idea." And yes, that's quite provocative. But what he meant was that by giving it a name, it sort of got these special qualities. And maybe it went a little too far, is kind of what he's suggesting. And I thought, you know, that sounds familiar. When I talked about jumping in with both feet to network automation, I'm talking about network automation with a little n and a little a. But we're talking about network automation with a big N, capital N, capital A. And we went from capitalized network automation to net DevOps. But really what we've been talking about all this time is software development. And I don't know that the rank and file network engineering types have sort of realized that just yet. And so by naming it, we sort of took it on this, was it the only path we could take? I'm not sure, right? But we certainly took it on this path. And again, never asking the right questions, right? So we have to start asking these better questions. What is it? What does it do? How does it behave? And if you posit that we're on this track largely because of the success with automation in the cloud environments, then you need to ask, okay, great, here's a solution. How is the network different from a cloud environment? Is it homogeneous? Is it one vendor or is it multi-vendor? Do I have a legacy of equipment from several vendors, each with differing capabilities? And so if automation is the right solution for cloud, then how does that differ? Or when you layer on those differences, how does it change the answer? Does it change the answer? And these are the questions I think we haven't really spent enough time considering. And yes, I'm gonna say the dirty word, requirements. So I'm gonna tell you a little story about how I started out. I started out in a software development team at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. And in a couple years, I moved over to the networking team. My boss calls me into the office one day and he says, "What do you know about structured cabling?" And I said, "Nothing." And he said, "You better find out." So I went and looked it up. And a few months later, I'm standing in front of a board. And this board is comprised of literally mission managers that fly missions to other planets. And I'm supposed to be presenting the plan to lay in a unified structured cabling plant at a large campus. I'm terrified, without a doubt. This is the most terrifying moment of my professional life. And to head this review board is a gentleman named Dick Matheson. He was revered and feared. Okay, he could kill a project with a look. He was acerbic, he was gruff and brief, and everyone kind of worshiped him. In fact, he always wore a little bow tie. And when the review board convened, I show up, and several of the review board members are also wearing little bow ties, to sort of honor him or show their respect of him. He was a powerhouse. So here I go. I talk about my requirements, not my requirements really, but the requirements for the campus's structured cabling system. I talk about the design and how the design is mapping to each of those requirements. I talk about the selection criteria that we're going to use for cabling vendors, because one of the decisions we made early on is that we did not have the expertise or the manpower, right, to do this work, and certainly do it with the quality and in the time frame that we needed. Prior to this, I should say, every mission ran their own infrastructure. Can you imagine? I mean, missions are going through, there's a new mission every year. They come in, they took over a building, they run their new cable. It was ridiculous. Eventually, it would have gotten to the point, I don't know I don't know if anybody's had a chance to tour Kennedy Space Center, but in the old buildings, the roofs would sag because of all the cable that had been run, because nobody ever pulls out cable. So we were not going to go there. Anyway, I present all of that, the selection criteria for the structured cabling vendor, how we're going to fund the cabling, how we're going to maintain it. I even went so far as to propose kind of a labeling scheme for each cable. I'm done, ready for the board to really kind of tear me to shreds. Dick Matheson says, "Who did this?" And I'm thinking, I got to go pack my office. I won't be here long. And I said, "Well, sir, I did with help from the team." Translation, if you love it, it was me. If you hate it, I had help. So, gives me a quick nod, and then he said, "Who thought up the labeling standard?" And I said, "Sir, that was me." He's like, "Good labeling standard." He closes his notebook, stands up, walks out. The rest of the board walks out with him. I'm like, oh God, this is a disaster. I look to my boss, in bewilderment and say, "I'm sorry, I don't know what happened. I thought it was going pretty well." And he looks at me, he's like, "Are you kidding? We're good, we got the green light. Let's get to work." I'm like, I don't understand that. He's like, "For Dick Matheson, that was a parade. You will go down in history as like the first, presenter that he actually said something positive about." Anyway, that scarred me for life in terms of appreciating requirements. And yes, in NASA, that's a culture, right? It didn't happen at JPL, but NASA builds man-rated things, right? And so understanding requirements, mapping requirements to solutions was just part of the culture. And so that's the culture I grew up in. I've never seen requirements valued as much since then, to be honest with you. In fact, I don't think requirements are valued at all. I really do think they're seen as busy work, right? The check marks you've got to go through to get something approved, but they really do have a lot of value. If I could get you requirements gummies, I would. So back to our point, right? We started out without asking many of the right questions and without any requirements. And where did we start? Where IT always starts. And this makes a certain amount of sense. We started with operations. So, what do we talk about these days? We talk about sources of truth. We talk way too much about sources of truth. And where is the source of truth? And how many do we need? Do we have one? Do we have more? We talk about teaching network engineers Python. Maybe other programming languages, Go gets thrown in there. That's just religion. And we talk about tools. And that's where we spend a lot of time talking. And while we've made progress, I don't think we've made enough. Operations is absolutely important, but we forget that someone had to build something for us to operate it, right? And so one of the things that's been happening, and I'm seeing more and more of this, is that I think that's getting acknowledged. But if you think about where you are in operations, you have a very limited view, right? You're sort of in the trenches, you're dealing with users, you're trying to keep things running, so your business can perform flawlessly, and so you don't have a perspective. And this happens more than you think. Maybe it's happening to you right now. So you're just trying to stay alive, right? You're just trying to survive and operate. So when I joined the networking group, that was its structure. It was one group. All we did was operate. For us, we kind of started in the middle, right? And I think it's led to a little bit of disorientation. I'm not sure our goals are clear. I know we have a lot of successes, but I can't put them in a framework for, true business impacting successes with network automation. We have a lot of partial solutions. Bad behavior, like I said, we spend way too much time talking about sources of truth. We have these tortured paths we're on right now. Much better since this community came into being, to be sure. So we've overdeveloped some of our muscles and let some of our other muscles atrophy. Dick Matheson would say it's because we don't have requirements. So we have this kind of tunnel vision and limited perspective, but really, and this is beginning to play out now, you'll hear a lot about more of this in this AutoCon. This is the full landscape, which involves basically start to end, design to operations, and do it all over again. So I want to talk about beginning at the beginning, not just in terms of let's fold in the design information into our automation process, but talking about the full pipeline, not just the pipeline kind of in the middle that operations uses, but starting from who built the thing that we're operating. And tools are not going to solve any of these problems. They will solve a problem. They may solve a few problems. But tools are basically exercise equipment, right? And I won't bore you with a number of different exercise equipment type things I have purchased in my life. At the end of the day, some of them are very useful and they're great, and some of them get stuck in a closet and get dusty. But the one thing that makes them good or bad or useful is that I use them. And so we have to understand what tools we have, what problems they solve, and we have to use them, right? Don't let the tools become the dusty exercise equipment. We still have to do all that work. And I think part of this is why it's been difficult to articulate kind of a network automation framework, because we started in the middle and we haven't sort of widened the perspective enough to really look at the whole landscape. So, what if we lived in a world where I'm doing design, that's not going to go away, but I'm doing it differently. I'm doing it in a format that I can then feed into the pipeline, at the beginning of the pipeline, that I can measure against. And so if we had started there, I got to ask, would the truth be ambiguous? Would we ask, okay, is the truth on the switch? Is the truth in a system? Is the truth in a diagram? No. We would know exactly where that truth is, and we could use it. That's one of the biggest problems, is that I think we know the truth, but we just can't use it in the current format that it's in. And you're going to see, you've already seen some excellent examples of solutions like this. Jeremy Schulman did a presentation at AutoCon 2 that talks about this, and really looking forward to Christian Dell's presentation here at AutoCon 3, because he's going to talk more about this. So that movement is starting, and we've got some great tools available now that can help us with that. But I think the challenge for us is going to be, we have to change that mindset. We have to make it easy for network engineers and designers to design in the right formats. And if we had started out at the beginning, like I said, would we be having these kind of struggles with which is the right thing, right? We keep looking for answers in our tools, and they may not be there yet. They may not be there at all. So we're kind of dodging the tough questions, right? The tool is never going to answer those questions unless we start the process correctly, we feed the right data to our tools, and then we use our tools to measure against. So, like I said, a lot of times we know what it should be, we just can't use that data. It's in my head, it's in a drawing. So we really have to move away from that, and I think this is the community that can start building that muscle memory for network engineers to get started, not with a blank Word document or a blank Visio, but in something that we can use. So programmatically consumable data, I think, has to be the next challenge we tackle. And like I said, building that muscle memory to get network engineers to start thinking about how to capture that design data so that everybody else can use it all the way through the pipeline. But there's a catch. So I mentioned I started out in a network engineering team, and we were just operations. It was one team. And after a while, we noticed the missions were coming to us and asking for things that weren't even on our radar. Features, capabilities, wireless was a fun one for us because we got hauled into a meeting with the Mars mission managers who said, how come there isn't wireless everywhere? These are, obviously I'm dating myself. Like, he's telling us he can stand up wireless in his house. How hard can it be? So off we go, right? And what we realize is that the people that are operating the network can't be paying attention to where it should be going. They're too busy. Operations always wins, as it should be, right? But the people who operate can't design as well. And so I've been through several iterations of this challenge where the design team splits off. And what invariably happens is the operations, the delivery to operations chasm, right? People are over here making fabulous things, the best things since sliced bread, and the guys over here are just trying to stay alive, operating what they've got. And there's never kind of a marriage there. There's never a path across the chasm unless you build it. And so I was very lucky in my early days, and I had some incredibly strong technical leadership. And they recognized that early on, and they're like, okay, we've got to split the teams, we've got to make sure that, that the design team does their thing, and we have to make sure that there is a clear path to delivering to operations so that the operations team doesn't show up one day and say, I'm getting a call about this thing. I never heard of it. Why are they calling us? Which actually happened. So that strong leadership kind of called out the elephant in the room and said, what is that process going to be? And we were very lucky. We started out really at the budget cycle, right? And so operations and design was present throughout this whole chain. What are we budgeting for this year? Okay, these are the projects we're going to have to undertake, design. How are we operating them? When are they going to be done? We used ops as basically our guinea pigs so that they could start getting familiar with whatever we were building. And that process worked very well, and I don't see it very often. And so as we bring in design, we have to pay attention to bridging that gap, which is funny because, DevOps, and it all starts, in my mind, with asking these really 4 questions, or looking at these 4 aspects of any solution. What problem are we trying to solve? You guys are probably sick of hearing me say that. How is this product or service going to help me provide the solution? What are the other options? How else could I do it, right? Who is going to implement the solution? You heard me talk about the cabling effort, and that was an early decision. We don't have the capability to do this, or the manpower. No one on the team is Bixby certified. Claudia hadn't even heard about structured cabling till a few months ago. It's not us. So the decision was made that that part of the work was going to be done by a vendor. And we had criteria for how we were going to select them. So who is going to implement the solution? And that's something we really need to focus on, because right now, is it the network engineer that's learning Python in her spare time? Or does this project need a professional software developer? And a lot of times the answer to that is yes. And then, of course, how are we going to support the solution? Which I think we're doing pretty well at, to be honest with you. So we have the complete pipeline. We feed it design information in structured data formats that we can consume. Everything flows from there, right? If you still need to crank out low-level design documents or high-level design documents or drawings, those can all come from that. Of course, we're going to need configurations at some point. You're going to need hardware lists. All of that information, if it's available to us at the start in that programmatic manner, will make the rest of the work and testing and validating the work much, much easier. And I think that's a big part of what we're missing. We sort of have a lot of good capabilities on the bottom, and we got to work on the top part. So I will tell you that when the two teams kind of separated, the first thing that the operations manager said was, you know what? No one joins the development team or the design team unless they spend like a month in operations. And the idea there was that if you're not answering the calls of the users, you really don't feel kind of what you're designing up here in your little ivory tower, far, far away from the people yelling at you because their port's down or whatever, right? You don't kind of viscerally grasp that. And so the idea was that anybody that works in the design team actually also gets to work in operations periodically, just to generate that appreciation for what the operations team has to do. So we need basically legs and upper body, right? We want to be the superheroes of our enterprises, of our organizations. We want to be the enablers of high quality end-to-end service delivery. So we got to keep working out whatever exercise equipment you have, but the exercise equipment isn't going to give you the superhero physique, okay? You are going to give yourself the superhero physique by using whatever exercise equipment meets your needs, meets your requirements. And so I want to kind of focus on this new beginning where we start with requirements, and it doesn't have to be, you know, this long treatise of requirements, functional, you know, secondary requirements. Trust me, I've been through all of that. But you got to know the problem you're solving. You got to know the issues with it, and you have to understand all the pieces of the solution that you're putting together, how they fit in. And it's not bad to understand, okay, well, if this is too expensive, because let's face it, cost winds up being a determiner of what we're going to build a lot of the time. Well, what else could I do? How else could I meet this need? So however you want to think about requirements, and I know requirements is really kind of a bad word with little perceived value, although I think there's a tremendous amount of value there that's just not in our culture these days. And maybe that's just a function of kind of how I started out in my career. And the other thing, the next thing, is leadership, right? I was very lucky that I had some really strong leadership, and they deferred to the technical teams, and they pushed for what we said we needed. We said, hey, you can't have every mission pulling cable, okay? The buildings are going to fall down. So they talked to the CIO, they said, this is a little crazy. We cannot support this, we don't maintain it. So the CIO got convinced, thanks to my leadership, and then the CIO said, okay, missions, you're bringing me a new project, I'm taking the IT money off the top. And that's another key, right, is to control the money. And that's how we were successful in doing that. Otherwise, there would be sagging buildings in a campus somewhere in Southern California. The resource conversation is one we need to start having. Again, who's building it for you? Is it your network engineer that learned Python in the evenings? Or is it valuable enough, a service, a capability that you're offering to your business that you're gonna staff it? Either one works, right? You just need to know which way it's gonna go, and you need to understand the last one. Who is gonna support it? So I'm kind of at a crossroads right now, professionally, in that I've spent a lot of time in software development. I haven't picked up a networking book, I realized, in years. What do I read? I read Adam Ard, Reshaping Software, Rethinking Software. I read a lot of books about programming languages, about building databases and schemas. Very different, right, from what I used to read, right? I used to read things about BGP and IPv6. And so I don't think I'm alone in that journey. And right now, I will be honest, I spend more time supporting software that we've developed than I do configuring routers and switches. Is that the way I want my career to progress? I'm not sure. Can I be an exceptional network engineer and be an exceptional software developer? I'm not sure about that either. I do know that both of those disciplines are deep, okay? And so I worry that maybe I can be a good network engineer and an okay scripter. But am I going to be able to do the jobs adequately? And then I think, is someone going to pay me 2 salaries because I'm a network engineer and I'm also a software developer? Maybe I can get behind that. But you get my point, right? We're all, I think, a lot of us are coming upon that crossroads. So how do we start? How do we start rethinking about this? How do we start building that muscle memory so that design isn't basically in a Visio or in some kind of a diagram, so that we can use the design as our source of truth? Because that's what it is. We have to take the first step.
I used to work in dangerous places, and people who moved survived, and those who didn't. Movimiento es vida. Movimiento es vida. You have a better chance if you come with us.
Tenemos mejor chance si nos vamos con él.
¿Necesitan algo más antes de irse?
You need anything else before you leave?
So, let's not be the father. Does everybody know what happens to the father? If you don't know what happens to the father, you can probably guess. So as we think about how we're going to start building that muscle memory, how we're going to change how we start things, because that's really what I'm advocating, I do want to take a moment to talk about distractions. We all know we live in a world that's comprised almost entirely of distractions. And AI has just ratcheted that up. And so I want you to think about, how are you spending your time? If you decide you're going to go towards the software development, are you spending your time furthering that goal? If you're going to stay a network engineer and just advise a software developer, and that works very well too, right? Are you basically focusing on your network engineering skills? Just be careful of distractions. I'm a big fan of the Sunday, I'm going to pull a thread, I'm going to pick a topic and just see where it takes me, because that's useful, right? You want to understand what's out there in the landscape. This conference gives you kind of that broader landscape. But at the end of the day, you got to ask yourself, time is limited. What am I focusing on? We had a project a few years ago that was just a nightmare, and everyone wanted it to be over. And we couldn't help ourselves. We'd get together for a meeting, a status meeting, and we'd spend the first 15 minutes like complaining and just grousing about how we wanted this project to be over. We finally had to institute a rule. 5 minutes in, someone had to ask this question: is this getting us closer to closing the project? And if this conversation, if the answer was no, then we basically had to stop talking and shift the conversation to something that was useful. We have to sort of take that approach in so many of the things that can distract us. Is it a distraction or is there value? I'm up here because of AutoCon. The AutoCon 0 through AutoCon 2, all of the conversations, the things I heard up on the stage, the conversations I've had with people have allowed me to make kind of these assessments, at least in my own career, in my own network automation path. I am the result of NAF. And so we've got some tough decisions ahead. I talked about kind of that crossroads. We want to help the people who are just starting out. We can't forget them, because there's a lot of them. I don't know that as we as a community appreciate how many people are just looking at it, are scared of it, don't know what to do with it. And so I'm really looking to this community to help bring in kind of the people just starting out, and also help those of us who have been doing this for 10 years and are not quite sure which way to go. I think this is the community that can help with those decisions. Let's face it. So we started out with network engineers. They're not needed anymore. They're going to get automated into irrelevance. To, okay, we kind of need network engineers. To now, hey, network engineer, you have to be a really good network engineer, and you have to be a software developer too. Think about, that's kind of the path we've taken. And we need to help kind of guide everyone through these tough decisions that I think are coming up. We have to differentiate. Is what I'm doing personal productivity, personal skills that I want to learn? Or am I after kind of enterprise impacting service delivery? Am I going to be a network engineer? Am I going to be a software developer? These are buckets that I think if we identify what we're trying to do will help us move forward in the right way. I don't discourage the personal productivity, right? I am a child of that, right? But I've also been involved in situations where I knew I didn't have the skills necessary to provide, what this program needed. And so I went to my manager and I said, hey, it's not going to be me. We need a software developer, right? Or we need a system administrator. Or you have to recognize what you're trying to do and who's going to do it. So my evolution as a network engineer, right? Started out with cabling, love cabling still, right? Taught some networking automation, doing a lot of automation in my career, moving into the software developer area, and I don't know where I'm going to wind up. Good luck, good health, and thank you very much.
Hello. Do I need to get up? Hi, everyone.
Where's the banner?
So, okay, I'm going to be bugging you for months for this. Great presentation. So I'm trying to keep it very short. Two-leg question. First, I was thinking you were going to push for the design first, because you did. And the first question is about that. When we're talking about a design that produces data that are easy to consume from a programmable infrastructure, aren't we pushing perhaps the problem a bit upriver? The same kind of problems we were dealing all these years, fighting about the sources of truth and which tool and everything. Do you think there's a danger there? That's the one leg. The second leg is about your fabulous 4 points there, leadership. So I was thinking, we are all facing this, or a lot of us, we are. So maybe as you presented your own evolution, and we're dealing with a whole generation of people who went through all of this, and is now leading others, doesn't that mean that perhaps we need to become leaders in this space in order to help the next generation? So what do you think about that?
So I'll take your last question first, because it's perfect. So I have been a VP of infrastructure, and I don't like leadership because I do like technical leadership, I will tell you that. I think if leadership is something that gives you satisfaction, I hope that many of you are, as you progress, I hope you can move into those leaderships. I was talking to someone yesterday about kind of evaluating tools, and we were talking about the person that can tell you if a tool is actually going to solve a specific problem is usually not the leader. If the leader is usually not the person making the decision, right, about the tool selection. And so, yes, I can tell my boss, this is what we need and this is why. And sometimes they may pay attention to me, and sometimes they don't. I will tell you that in the course of my career, I don't see a lot of good technical leadership anymore. I don't know why. Maybe it's all about the budgets. Maybe it's because they didn't kind of come up through the ranks. So Tiana's point, I think that if you came up through the ranks, you would be a spectacular leader. And short of that, you've got to figure out how to speak to leaders in the language they understand. And that's something that I really do hope we can foster in this community, because like you said, we are all facing that. And so EIA, my company, we took on kind of this, the leadership perspective role, because leadership isn't appreciated at all in my mind. And one of the things we found out as we talked to past leaders, client leadership that let us talk to them about this topic, half of them were like, oh yeah, we're already automating. Yeah, we bought DNAC, we're good. Okay, short conversation. But that's what's out there. And so whether we become leaders ourselves or whether we learn how to speak their language to convince them that there's more to this picture, there's more to network automation with a capital N and capital A, I think that is a challenge for us. Do I think we're gumming up the pipeline with data? No, I don't.
Hi, thanks for the presentation. Love the idea of starting with requirement. However, for teams with little to no automation, for some time we said to bring value quickly, quick wins and so on. How do you see this idea? Maybe are they conflicting for starting with requirement and having quick value, quick wins and so on?
If I understand the question correctly, I think what we have to start refocusing is not, you've heard this before, Peter said this in AutoCon too, it's not about let's do network automation, it's about here's a problem that's really causing us grief. Let's look at the solution set for that problem. I don't know if I did a little demo about self-service port flips, right? Self-service, change this port to another VLAN. We have the tools right now, and we had before, if you worked on it hard enough, where you could put enough guardrails so that, yeah, do you want, the secretary to change a port? Sure. Under the right circumstances, we can do that safely. So I guess I would encourage us to look at the problem and understand how network automation fits within it. Just what can be automated. So I'm a consultant, right? I work with a lot of different clients. The amount of kind of infrastructure I have access to differs by client. And so we literally have to look at, okay, here's this project, here's what we're trying to do. What can we automate? I am unfortunately not in the enterprise anymore so that I could look at automating the entire pipeline, so I have to automate little pieces. But what that gives me is a perspective about where there's a good solution set for for a particular piece. And then if you automate that, and it usually winds up being something that is wholly in your control, then you start thinking about, well, okay, what would be great is I want to basically push tickets to ServiceNow, but that's a whole other team. I got to go talk to them. And maybe they'll let me, automate that. And I need to get IP addressing from info blocks. And that's a whole other team. Okay, let me go. And so then you start piecing together little pieces of automation solutions so you can build that pipeline. The holy grail for us, seems like, right, is basically, commit and something happens. I don't know that that's ever going to work the way people envision, the way that works in a true DevOps and a true cloud environment for those of us down dealing with switches and cabling. But it's a goal, to be sure. And so to the extent that you can establish good interfaces and stitch them together for a solution, and that's, in my mind, what I always think of. I'm not trying to automate something. The automation, and that goes back to that personal productivity. Yeah, I don't want to flip VLANs, so I'm going to automate that for myself. That's not an enterprise solution, right? That's kind of making my own job easier. We have to start distinguishing between those two, and then I think we can start talking about how we build those solutions. And it doesn't start with, I need to automate. It starts with, what is the thing that's causing my users grief? What is the thing my business needs to really excel at what they need to do? That's where it starts. Peter said it a lot better in AutoCon too.
I have one question before I let you go. Invoking moderator privilege here. I hate doing any kind of leg work or upper body work. And there's a much longer conversation here about what it means to be a well-rounded engineer and acquiring skills and maybe being a systems engineer versus just a network engineer, just an automation engineer, just an electrical engineer, and so forth. But I think you've got a lot of people thinking about this. Are you available for questions and discussion in the hallways?
Of course. I will be lurking about, so.
Excellent.
And this is what this community, like I said, I am a product of NAF, and the ability to articulate some of these questions is only because of the material I've heard here. So let's get started. Thank you very much.
Please show your appreciation.